The psychology behind why a married man stays linked to you. Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered why he keeps coming back, even though he has a whole life built with someone else? Why do your messages arrive late at night? Why can't he just leave and move on? The answer is not where you might think. It's not about forbidden love, fate, or soulmate connection. It is something much deeper and disturbing. Carl Jung discovered that there is an invisible psychological force that binds certain men to specific women, a bond that transcends logic, morals, and even marriage itself. It's such a powerful mechanism that it can keep a man emotionally chained for years, decades, maybe forever. And the most shocking, not even he himself fully understands why this happens. In this video, I'm going to reveal the 8 psychological patterns that Jung identified, truths that therapists rarely share openly. Get ready, because what you're about to discover can completely change your perspective on this situation. 1. The projected shadow. What he sees in you. There is a hidden part inside each person that he does not show to anyone. They are desires, dreams, and aspects of the personality that have been locked away since childhood. This repressed part is desperately looking for a way out, for someone where it can finally express itself. When a married man looks at you, he's often not seeing who you really are. He's seeing a mirror of all that he has buried deep within himself. Think of it as a version of him that was never allowed to exist. Maybe he always wanted to be more spontaneous, more adventurous, more free, but life, responsibilities, and social expectations shaped a completely different person. With you, this forgotten version comes to life. You represent the freedom he lost, the passion that was stifled, the youth that slipped through his fingers. The most fascinating thing is that this has nothing to do with your real characteristics. You may be introverted, but he sees extraversion. You may be conservative, but he sees rebellion. What happens is a psychological projection where his own qualities become a blank canvas for his unfulfilled desires. He transfers to you everything you would like to be, but never had the courage. This dynamic creates an intensely addictive connection. When he's with you, he feels like he's finding lost pieces of himself. It's like breathing after being submerged for a long time. The sensation is so powerful that he interprets it as something special, unique, impossible to replicate. In fact, what he is experiencing is the reunion with rejected parts of his own identity. His official relationship does not offer this space. There are defined roles, clear expectations, an image to maintain. With you, he can explore forbidden territories of personality without judgment. This psychological freedom quickly becomes indispensable, creating an emotional dependency that he mistakes for deep love or destiny. The call continues because he needs that contact with parts of himself that he can only access through you. 2. The anima activated. When you become your inner fantasy. Every man carries within himself an ideal feminine image built throughout life. This image begins to form from the early years, influenced by the women around him, by the stories he heard, by the movies he watched. Over time, this inner figure becomes an unconscious pattern that guides your deepest attractions and desires. When you show up in his life, something extraordinary happens. You activate this internal image in a way that perhaps no other woman has been able to before, including your wife. It's not that you're objectively better or prettier. It's just that you, by chance or by specific characteristics, correspond perfectly to the model that has inhabited his unconscious for decades. This explains why the attraction seems so inexplicable and overwhelming. He's not just attracted to you as a real person. He's fascinated by the perfect representation of everything he has ever wanted to find in a woman. You awaken intense feelings in him because you embody the feminine ideal that he has pursued all his life without even knowing he was looking for. This activation creates a completely different emotional experience than what he lives in marriage. With his wife, there is familiarity, routine, a partnership built on shared responsibilities. With you, there is mystery, discovery, the feeling of finally having found something that has always been missing. He feels that you complete him because you fill the space of this ideal female figure who inhabited only his imagination. The danger of this dynamic is that it works regardless of who you really are. You can change, grow, show other sides of your personality, but for him, you will always be that powerful first impression. He has fixed in you characteristics of the inner fantasy, and even if the reality is different, his unconscious continues to see what he wants to see. This distortion keeps the connection active even when the relationship struggles or doesn't make logical sense. You have become the materialization of a dream he didn't even know he had. If you want to understand the psychology behind why a married man stays linked to you, it's not coincidence. It's an unconscious pattern explained by Carl Jung. Jungmethod, pinned in the first comment. 3. The incompleteness complex, why he needs two women. Most married men who maintain parallel liaisons are not trying to replace their wives. They are trying to fill voids that they believe a single person cannot fill. This belief comes from a deep sense of incompleteness that begins long before marriage, usually in childhood or adolescence. Inside his mind is the idea that different women awaken different versions of who he is. The wife represents security, stability, the responsible man that society expects him to be. You represent passion, adventure, the version of him that still feels alive and desirable. He doesn't want to choose between these versions because they both seem essential to feeling complete. This internal fragmentation makes him need two separate worlds. In the official world, he fulfills obligations, keeps up appearances, plays the expected role. In the secret world with you, he escapes pressures, allows himself to be vulnerable, experiences intense emotions that the routine of marriage no longer provides. Each woman harbors a different psychological need, and he genuinely believes that he needs both to function. What makes this even more complicated is that he's not lying when he says he has real feelings for you. He really has. The problem is that he also has feelings for his wife, but of a completely different nature. In his mind, these two connections occupy separate spaces and do not compete with each other. You are not a threat to marriage because it serves a distinct emotional purpose that marriage does not fulfill. This need for division comes from an inability to integrate all parts of one's personality into a single relationship. Instead of developing depth and complexity with one person, he distributes different aspects of himself among different women. This creates the illusion of wholeness, when in fact it only masks the internal fragmentation that he never resolved. The permanence of the connection with you is directly related to your function of filling that specific void that no one else can. 4. The emotional safety zone, you as a refuge. Everyone needs a place where they can let their guard down completely, a space where you don't need to be strong, competent, or in control. For many married men, that place is not the home. At home, there are demands, expectations, the constant pressure to be a provider and protector. With you, he finds something radically different. You become the emotional refuge where he can be fragile without being judged. They can admit fears, express insecurities, show vulnerability that would be interpreted as weakness in the family environment. This emotional freedom is extremely valuable because men rarely have safe spaces to process feelings without fear of losing respect or status. When he's with you, the defenses drop. He doesn't have to pretend that he has all the answers or that he's always in control. It can be confusing, contradictory, even immature. You offer unconditional acceptance in a way that he doesn't experience anywhere else. This acceptance creates a deep emotional dependence because it touches on needs he didn't even know he had. Marriage, over time, tends to become transactional. Discussions about bills, responsibilities with children, planning for the future. Conversations lose emotional depth and become functional. With you, the conversations are different. There is room to philosophize, to talk about feelings, to explore existential questions that do not fit into the domestic routine. This difference makes him associate you with lightness and relief, while associating the house with weight and obligation. It's not that he doesn't love his family. It's just that with you, he breathes differently. You represent the opposite of daily pressure, and this psychological function of an outlet quickly becomes indispensable for his emotional balance. Whenever life gets too heavy, the automatic impulse is to seek that refuge you provide. The connection remains because you have become essential to his mental health in a way that even he does not fully understand. 5. The mistress archetype, the psychological role you occupy. There are psychological roles that transcend cultures and times, patterns that have been repeated in the human mind since forever. One of these patterns is the figure of the lover, who occupies a very specific place in the male imagination. It has nothing to do with morality or character. It is a psychological function that awakens particular aspects of the male psyche. When you occupy this role, you automatically become the bearer of certain symbolic qualities. Mystery, because he never knows you completely. Passion, because the encounters are intense and limited. Freedom, because the relationship does not have the ties of married life. These characteristics are not necessarily who you are, but rather what the role represents in their unconscious. This archetype has power because it offers an emotional experience that marriage rarely provides. While the wife is associated with motherhood, responsibility, and daily life, you are associated with seduction, the forbidden, escape. These associations stir primitive layers of the male brain that respond intensely to the new, the challenging, the inaccessible. The fascination does not come only from you as an individual, it comes from the contrast you represent. If he had full access to you, if you lived together day by day, the charm would diminish drastically. It is precisely the limited and forbidden nature of the connection that maintains the intensity. Distance and impossibility feed the fantasy in a way that proximity would destroy. This role also protects you from criticism that your wife receives. As he doesn't see you dealing with real problems, bills, fatigue, or routine, you remain idealized. He never sees you in a bad mood in the morning, stressed about work, or dealing with mundane issues. You exist only in his best moments, which creates an unfair comparison where you always win. This idealization keeps attraction at unrealistic levels that would be impossible to sustain in a conventional relationship. It is not only connected to you, but to the very fantasy that you represent. 6. The prison of guilt, how it keeps you connected. It may seem contradictory, but the guilt he feels for being with you does not drive him away. In fact, it creates another layer of emotional bonding. Every moment they spend together comes with a moral weight that he carries alone. That guilt needs to be justified, and the only possible justification is that what you have is too special to give up. The more he feels guilty, the more he needs to believe that you are worth the emotional cost. If the relationship were superficial or unimportant, the guilt would be unbearable and unsustainable. So his brain does some mental gymnastics. It turns you into something so meaningful that it justifies moral distress. You need to be extraordinary for his choices to make sense. This dynamic creates a cycle where guilt fuels emotional investment. He constantly thinks about you because he needs to process conflicting feelings. This constant mindfulness turns into obsession. The more time and emotional energy he invests in dealing with guilt, the more important you become in his life. There is also a self-sabotage component. Men who carry deep guilt often punish themselves by keeping complicated situations. Leaving you would be almost too easy a redemption. The very difficulty of being torn between two women becomes a way of paying for mistakes, of suffering for choices. The emotional pain he experiences partially relieves moral guilt. In addition, guilt prevents you from being completely happy anywhere. When he is with his family, he thinks of you and feels guilty. When he is with you, he thinks about his family and feels guilty. This constant state of internal conflict makes you a permanent presence in his mind, even when you're apart. The connection is strengthened not in spite of guilt, but because of it. The paradox is that trying to do the right thing and walk away would generate even more guilt, because it would mean abandoning someone he hurt with promises and hopes. 7. Emotional addiction. When attachment becomes dependency, the human brain does not distinguish well between different types of emotional intensity. When he feels that chemical discharge, when he sees you, when he receives your message, when he hears your voice, the brain interprets it as a reward. Over time, these rewards create an addictive pattern similar to what happens with any addiction. The forbidden and limited nature of the relationship intensifies this effect. Because encounters are rare and risky, each interaction carries a disproportionate emotional charge. Its brain learns to crave those dopamine spikes you provide. In the intervals between dates, he experiences something akin to withdrawal symptoms. Restlessness, obsessive thoughts, increasing need for contact. This addictive pattern has specific characteristics. He may try to walk away, promise himself that he will break up, but the force of the compulsion always brings him back. It is not moral weakness or lack of love for one's family. It is a neural circuit that has strengthened through repetition and emotional intensity, creating a genuine dependency that works at the chemical level of the brain. Addiction is also fueled by unpredictability. He never knows exactly when he'll see you, how you'll react, if you'll be available. This uncertainty activates the same brain mechanisms that make gambling so addictive. Intermittent reward is far more powerful for creating dependency than the predictable reward that marriage provides. Over time, he needs larger and larger doses to feel the same intensity. Conversations need to be deeper, meetings more frequent, declarations more intense. This escalation is typical of any addiction. What started as attraction has turned into psychological necessity, and he literally doesn't know how to function without this source of emotional stimulation that you represent. The connection persists because his nervous system has been reprogrammed to need you the same way it needs any other addictive substance. 8. The illusion of choice. Why he never really decides. The question that probably eats away at you is, why doesn't he choose at once? The uncomfortable truth is that indecision is not a temporary state. For many men in this situation, indecision is the choice. Keeping both options open is exactly what his unconscious wants, because then he doesn't have to give up any of the psychological needs that each woman satisfies. To decide would mean to integrate all the contradictory parts of one's own personality and to take full responsibility for a direction of life. This requires emotional maturity that many men simply haven't developed. It is psychologically easier to maintain the status quo, even with all the stress it generates, than to face the devastating consequences of a definitive choice. He is also trapped in a fantasy that someday the situation will resolve itself. You may get tired and walk away, eliminating the need for him to make an active decision. Maybe his wife will find out and decide for him. Perhaps the circumstances of life will change so that the choice becomes obvious. This passive waiting is a way to avoid emotional responsibility. There is also the paralyzing fear of regret. If he chooses family, he will forever wonder what life would have been like with you. If you choose you, You will carry the guilt of having destroyed the family and can idealize what you lost. This fear of future regret keeps him frozen in the present, unable to move in any direction. The brutal reality is that as long as he manages to maintain both situations, he probably will. Men in this position only make decisions when forced by external circumstances, rarely by conscious choice. The situation needs to become untenable in some way for him to finally be pushed out of the comfort zone of indecision. Until then, he will continue to say that he is confused, that he needs time, that he does not know what to do, when in fact he has already made his choice a long time ago. He chose not to choose.